Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy, constants in change. Our understanding of the mind has undergone fundamental changes in the last 25 years. It has created new perspectives in neurology and psychology. There are also cultural and historical aspects to it. Change and constant are opposites, and today's topic is a statement of kind of a paradox, as it says that it's constants in change. We are looking at constants in the middle of change or constants continuously in change. To discuss this very interesting and intriguing subject, we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, can we start with the title itself? What does the title stand for?
Title is paradoxical and it in a way represents the journey of any branch of knowledge. So psychoanalysis is no exception. There is a continuous flow in every school of psychoanalysis. So if we look at 7 to 10 schools of psychoanalysis, we can almost visualize this as 7 to 10 rivers flowing. And in each river, there are rocks. The rocks are the constants. And often, rivers crisscross each other in the process of synthesis. And in that flow also, there are some rocks which are constant. Now, if we take up any one school of psychoanalysis and start with a simple explanation, there are three kinds of constants in any school of psychoanalysis. There are philosophical constants, like the belief in the unconscious. There are conceptual constants, like in Freudian school, it would be the Oedipus. In Jungian school, it would be individuation and the concept of archetypes. And in Cohesion school, it would be the concept of the self. So these are conceptual constants. And then you have technique constants, like the frame, the interpretation of free association, the significance of dream analysis. These are like technique constants. So we have three categories of constants in every school of psychoanalysis: the philosophical constants, the conceptual constants, and the technique constants. And these constants are situated in the middle of a flux. So in every school, research is happening, development is happening, and in the middle of this flow, in the middle of this river, these rocks are standing as constants. Now, these constants are not eternal, unchangeable, absolute constants. In the sense, over a period of time, their significance, their revaluation, all of that undergoes a change. And therefore, it is very interesting to see how constant of one school survive on the entire platform of psychoanalysis when it collides with constants of the other school, and how individually and together these constants undergo a change in the journey of psychoanalysis. So there are constants which are constants at different points, and there are constants which are constant across the history of psychoanalysis. And these constants need to be understood as to what extent are they etched in stone, and to what extent are they flexible, and how do you use these constants? How much do you believe the constants to be constants? When do you think a constant needs to undergo a partial change? And when does constant of one school have to be brought together with a constant of another school to create a synthetic structure? And this is very important for all new practitioners of psychoanalysis who should have perspective from multiple schools and be able to engage and manage constants and non-constants of different schools for a purpose of healing, given a particular pathology in the person.
Are there any constants changing in neurology which has some connection with psychoanalysis?
Many of them, and I can cite 5 of them for our short discussion. First, where is the mind? Some people say never mind. But if you mind and if you want to answer this question, the situation is totally different today than what it was 25 years back. Nobody talked about the, the neural connections in the gut area or the intestinal area. Today, people are talking about the gut mind or decentralized mind. And this is very different from everything being concentrated in the brain and the body being like a network where you have one server and other vanilla nodes without processing power. Now we have distributed processing. So the whole model is different. So this constant of where the mind is it only in the brain or is it spread over? That is one very important thing. Second is this processing of information. So previously we thought it was a structural system that in the brain, there were different structures processing different things. Now we talk about simultaneous parallel processing of the same information happening at many different points in the brain. So this distributed parallel processing is the second important change. Third important change is the plasticity. We thought that it was not a plastic instrument and once damaged or once a function is assigned to a part, nothing can change. But now we see there is plasticity in that organ or in that system per se. The fourth is we thought our entire mind and everything related to psychology, our brain, our mind, and the whole psychology of a person is limited only to that person's lifespan. But studies in intergenerational trauma transmission have brought in the transpersonal element, that the personal mind has transpersonal elements. And these transpersonal elements can be intergenerational. They may be species oriented or they may be some other transpersonal element, even parapsychological element. But to be on the safer side of the scientific spectrum, at least the intergenerational part is clear. So this intergenerational element is a very important element. The fifth element is of this whole effect of hallucinogens, because they bring about a completely new dimension into the way the brain works, the mind works, and how we can get entry into the mind into areas with the help of hallucinogens, which is not possible otherwise. So the hallucinogen, in a sense, becomes like the telescope of psychology. So what telescope was to astronomy, hallucinogen can potentially be to psychology. And this is something put forward by Terence McKenna. It's not my argument, but I think it's a very strong argument. So these are some of the elements which were constants a few years back and now are undergoing a change. Similarly, the element of rewiring of the brain through therapy, that also has undergone radical changes. We can now see how therapy actually rewires the brain and how default responses undergo a change using all sorts of imaging techniques. So these are the constants which are undergoing changes. And the best part is that now we can study many of the psychoanalytic phenomena, given the advances in neurology, in a more neurological way. And see, for example, to answer the question of why it is easy for something to come from unconscious to conscious, but not so easy for something to go from conscious to the unconscious. For example, in an OC case, the impulse comes to do the compulsion. And the man tells himself, I don't want to do the compulsion. But the inside out is too strong for the outside in. Now, why that is so? This kind of question for the first time we can take up in a more neurological way. And therefore, in both psychology and neurology, psychoanalysis and neurology, the constants are getting in question, and some of the constants have become more flexible, and now some of the constants are actually constants in change, not constants in the middle of change, but constants undergoing a process of modification. Take one more example, that uh, the whole idea of the immune system being partly built after birth, after the ingestion of the mother's milk. And similarly, you can talk about the concept of the cell partly inborn and partly getting modified in experience. So some of the elements of uh, psychoanalysis also are undergoing a change. So in both areas, in fact, in all sciences, uh, there are very few constants which remain constants for long. But in psychoanalysis, contrary to the normal science, physical sciences, we have too many constants which have been constants for quite a long time. And the good news is that some of them now are in change.
You just mentioned transpersonal journey of mind. So, has the transpersonal movement found some solid base in science?
Yes, it has. Uh, you can look at 4 or 5 different ways where the transpersonal elements come in. One transpersonal element which was always there in psychoanalysis but not accepted in the mainstream was Jung's concept of the archetypes and the fantasies and mythological elements in the dream. So what he found in the dreams of psychotics in Switzerland, same kind of elements were found in dreams of ancient tribal cultures. And there was nothing in the environment common to both. So it had to come from inside. And it had to be a supra-personal or a transpersonal entity. So Jung was the first to bring in the transpersonal element in human psyche without using the word transpersonal, because he referred to the archaic heritage of mankind that is being passed from one generation to the other, and the whole concept of archetype. So this was one element. Recent studies in intergenerational trauma done on animals, they have clearly shown that traumatic elements are passed from generation to generation. And therefore, some of the trauma in a generation may be linked to trauma of the past generation and not be strictly due to anything experienced by the particular generation itself. So this is the second element of transpersonal. Third is the whole idea of hallucinogens. They are inducing certain experiences, uh, certain imageries, certain access to certain corners of the mind, which don't seem to be personal in nature. The fourth element is of certain breathing techniques and certain therapy techniques. More particularly, I'm referring to Stanislav Grof, what he calls holotropic breathing. When a person does that, many of the archetypal elements referred to by Jung often come. And these come up in people with completely different environmental exposures, completely different socio-economic conditions. And therefore, it seems to be more of a transpersonal element, that the transpersonal part of the mind somehow can be made to come up using the holotropic breathing. And certain yogic experiments and ingestion of certain substances, particularly in shamanic rites, they also bring in transpersonal elements. So these are very well documented instances of the transpersonal element in the psyche. And this fundamental philosophical belief of psychoanalysis that the mind is strictly personal and strictly starts at birth and ends at death. This is getting uh, challenges from the new researches, and this is one of the constants that is, I think, in change or should be in change. there is one more element of created memories. And this point can be taken up both in terms of advances in neurology and psychoanalysis as well as in transpersonal. That the created memories has this element of, it was a constant that uh, we did not believe that created memories can create traumas. Klein used to refer to unconscious fantasies. Freud used to refer to hysterical fantasies. But and Freud did talk about traumas created from imagined fantasies. I should say trauma created from fantasy. Klein did talk about not only the fantasy but also unconscious fantasy leading to trauma. But after them, nobody took it up much seriously. It was uh, thought of to be a very esoteric concept. But now, both in neurology and in psychoanalysis, as well as in transpersonal investigations, we are finding this whole element of created memories. And these created memories may be created just because of fertile desire and imagination, or they may have a transpersonal element. So this has to be looked at from both the points. So these are some of the movements which are not within psychoanalysis in allied areas, but they are the ones who are almost waiting to be synthesized into the mainstream psychology and also in psychoanalysis. And I'm sure as they do get synthesized, many of the constants will go into change.
Is there any evolutionary perspective on constants in change?
There are two perspectives when we talk of evolution. The first is a strictly biological way of looking at evolution. And second is the historical way of looking at evolution. And third is a very psychological way. I should not call it evolution, we should call it more of a development. But when we talk about the biological evolutionary way of looking at things, general understanding was that unless a species undergoes a significant modification, by and large, there is no biological change in the species. So unless we see a new subspecies, within that species, there is no big biological change. But we are seeing that because of the change in environment and our habits, quite an amount of change is happening very rapidly, like in the way the body functions. And this is bringing into consideration the idea of the plasticity of the body. Another element also is of epigenetics, which also talks about the plasticity of the body. That the genes are not everything, it is the environment the genes get, the epigenetics, which plays a big role in how the genes express themselves. So, in evolutionary terms, we do see that biology is far less a constant than we imagined it to be. And rather, it is a constant in change, maybe slow change, but still in change. The second element is of historical change. And the idea there is that during different periods of human history, does our basic psychological nature activate in different ways? To put it in Jungian terms, do different archetypes activate to different degrees given a historical situation? And the answer seems to be more of yes than no. That the outside has quite a strong influence on the way the inside fires and activates its code. And we also see that intergenerational element of historical transmission perhaps may be there. That communities which have been exposed to certain historical experiences may have a different operating system, if not the different hardware. So we see the biology in evolution being far more plastic and a kind of a historical element to the way the basic hardware activates itself. Coming to the design of nature argument, it's also an important aspect of this question. That if you believe that human history has to pass through certain phases, then obviously, according to design of nature, then obviously the mind has to function slightly differently across the historical periods. And therefore, let's say Sri Aurobindo talks about the tribal age, the the civilized village age, the traditional age, the archetypal age, the individual age, and the spiritual age. You can configure it differently, but roughly speaking, this kind of logic. Then, according to, if we take any other classification of history, for example, but you can even take the Western conceptualization of the Greek civilization, the Christian civilization, the Dark Ages, the modern era, and the post-modern era. And we can see biological differences, we can see psychological differences. Many of the sicknesses which were very common are no longer so common. Many of the sicknesses which were not there are now very common. Freud put it very well. He said Freud was talking of the guilty man, and I am talking of the tragic man. So the guilty man who had a drive frustration conflict, drive control conflict, and the guilty man who is fundamentally, and the tragic man who is fundamentally alone. So this has created very different basket of sicknesses which are more prevalent. So we do see a historical evolutionary element somehow working out. We are not still able to find a pattern to it. We are not able to name it, label it, and create a coherent theory of it. But we do find it existing in some way or the other.
Coming back to psychoanalysis, within psychoanalysis, which constants are now in change?
I think in all the four areas, the area of philosophy, model of the mind, pathogenesis, and healing technique. All the four categories which are fundamental to psychoanalysis and to any psychotherapy. In all the four categories, things are changing, and many of the constants are no longer as giant constants as once they were, and also no longer as solid constants as they were. So we see plasticity coming in at all levels. And the plasticity is pervading the whole of psychoanalysis. Take, for example, uh, the constant of the Oedipus, the constant of materialism, the constant of uh, affect being the only lever of change, and thought on it behavior being secondary. The constant of technique, that there should not be a third in the room, it should never be recorded. The constant of technique, that uh, we should never direct a session, but allow the unconscious to direct the session. So all these constants are now undergoing a change. For each of them, you will have a contrary school of therapy. So take the philosophical constant of materialism of Freud, and the Jungian school will be not in agreement with that constant. Take the significance of Oedipus, and Jung will not be in agreement, and Klein will be much less in agreement, although not completely in disagreement. Take Kohut, and he would talk of bypassing this through a strong self rather than involving in those elemental developmental problems. So we see at the level of philosophy more movement from materialism to idealism. At the level of pathogenesis, we see instead of reducing it to one Oedipus or to one paranoid schizoid split or to one self, we are looking at a multi-elemental situation of pathology. So we realize that all the concepts are correct, but all are limited, and all put together are still imperfect and limited. It is not that we have explored the whole of the mind if we put together all the existing schools of psychoanalysis. All put together still are 25% of what the mind is. So they are all incomplete in themselves, and put together they are still incomplete together. So what we see is all the constants are in change. For example, take ISTDP. In terms of technique, it is completely almost opposite to what the classical psychoanalytic technique is. In classical psychoanalysis, we don't record, they record, the video record. In classical psychoanalysis, we don't direct the session, they direct the session. In classical psychoanalysis, we allow free association, they stop the free association. In classical psychoanalysis, we do interpretation, they don't do interpretation, they allow things to emerge. And yet, they believe in the unconscious, they believe in the significance of free association, significance of dreams, and so on. But the technique is completely different, and the technique is head on if you look at the classical psychoanalytic technique. So all the constants of technique have undergone a change there. There is no constant which is sacred. Similarly, if we move out of psychoanalysis, in CBT, BT, REBT, the behavior and thought are far more important than affect, which is the core of psychoanalysis. So what is held as a long-standing constant in psychoanalysis is not respected as a sacred constant by people outside or even people inside of psychoanalysis. So there is a movement of, uh, should I say, kind of a centrifugal flowering out or centrifugal development in so many directions, which is happening. And I'm sure after the centrifugal movement, we will have a centripetal movement of synthesis. At present, anyone who disagrees actually is excommunicated. It's like every school is like a cult. So any idea which is too radical is thrown out with that centrifugal force. There is a kind of a cult centrifugal force of keeping that school pure of contamination of new ideas. And this centrifugal force throws out the dissent and the new ideas. But soon, as the new idea proves itself outside of the school, there is no choice but to assimilate it back into the school. And I'm sure that after the centrifugal movement, we will have a centripetal inflow of synthesis.
This just brings up a question in my mind. I mean, do we have time to go into that?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. When we are talking about constants in change in psychoanalysis and different schools of psychoanalysis or in psychology, if the very I mean the foundational stones or the foundational concept of a school are undergoing change, then is there a possibility that the boundaries will be completely blurred and there'll be confusion or some kind of fusion?
I wish there was confusion. Unfortunately, there is no confusion. There is fanaticism.
And also this whole notion of keeping it pure. I mean, this applies to even music also. I've heard these kind of arguments that, you know, it has to be classical Indian music has to remain pure as it is and no fusion to be brought in. So the same
Yes.
thing applies here also. I mean, the people who believe in purity of a school or an orientation may not want to agree with this. So how do you balance this out, this whole thing?
I wish there was confusion. Unfortunately, there is no confusion, this fanaticism. And that is because the self
But that
of,
fanaticism is because of the Puritan approach or something of the
uh,
people who are in the school.
uh, there is one element of it, but the other elements actually are more important. What happens is uh, that, as I was saying, that there is no confusion but a fanaticism. And uh, this fanaticism is largely because of the self of the people practicing the trade getting identified with the theory. So an attack on theory becomes an attack on the self. That is one element why they so defend any change with a rage. The second element is they have made careers out of it, and for many it is too late to learn something new and let go of that authority position to which they have reached. Because every new conceptual movement creates new leaders. And it is very difficult for an existing leader to continue to be a leader in the new movement. So there is also this very important factor of all that you have achieved in life with so much of hard work and struggle, that being shaken up. That is second. The third is over a period of time, because of some success. It is not that existing concepts don't give you any success. Of course, they give you success. Because of the success that they have seen, uh, they have got so convinced that it is this and nothing else. And the fourth element is they are castrated into identification with the aggressor. And this has to do with the training model of psychoanalysis, which is very castrating and conformity inducing, particularly in training and supervision. In my opinion, after a first few sessions of supervision, supervision does more harm than good, because very few supervisors know and can practice the fact that supervision is not for fault finding, it is to make things better. Unfortunately, we go through the route of fault finding, and the therapist is just terrified to go into supervision. So it's a very frustrating experience. It is not an encouraging and creative experience. So all these things put together, there is this fanaticism that builds up, and this fanaticism does not allow a flexible or a supple body of knowledge to exist in an open and creative way. And this creates too many constants for far too long.
So that is one part, that the people are not allowing the constants to change, but they are kind of guarding to the best of their abilities. But
True.
what if
Uh,
the constants are allowed to change? Will it really shake the foundation of the theory or the orientation itself, and
uh,
completely just scatter it or confuse it, or maybe there'll be like some fusion which will not be resolved or something? I'm just
yeah,
posing
yeah.
a question.
See, there is also this anxiety in the minds of many that synthesis can just lead into a chaos and anarchy, and that is true in one sense, but not true in another. It is true in the sense if uh, you are not able to sort of integrate knowledge and you get confused by contrasting elements.
Yes.
Uh, this poet Walt Whitman used to say, I am vast enough to contain contradictions. I behold multitudes. I think that if that containing capability and the clarity to keep things separate is not there, and that comes only from a deep knowledge and clarity, which requires a lot of mental work. If that is not there, then many schools will confuse. So if you have an average person, it is better to train only in one school with light perspective of other schools. But this is not the ideal. The real good training is to have multiple strong perspectives and be able to integrate and synthesize. So that is the ideal towards which people have to move. But yes, for some who are incapable of synthesis, it may lead to a temporary confusion, and that may call for too much of supervision. And therefore, for that group, it is better to have very strong training in one group and a light perspective of many, and just shifting patients who are not tuned to our group to whoever it belongs to. That seems to be a much safer option. But the ideal remains of integration.
Thank you for this wonderful answer. Uh, we go to our next question. How about the shamanic and hallucinogenic aspects related to the mind?
These are very important elements which are outside of psychoanalysis, very rich in terms of insights they have generated, both in terms of pathogenesis, healing, and the model of the mind, but have not yet got into psychoanalysis in the mainstream. Uh, Take, for example, the whole idea of the shamanic rites and how it works, partly because of the psychodrama, partly because of the placebo effect, partly because of the hallucinogen which is used, the herbs which are used. So all the three are in place. If you look at the shamanic ritual, it is very rich to understand from all the 3 points of view. You have this whole psychodrama which creates an effect, the placebo which creates an effect, and the hallucinogen substance which creates an effect. And this we have not studied. Particularly, Terence McKenna used to say that hallucinogen, many of them, can become to psychology what telescope was to astronomy. That only if we have it, we can explore certain states of mind, and not in normal waking state, we can explore those states of mind. So when the raw material itself is not available, how are we going to process and theorize about the mind, particular aspects of the mind which are not available otherwise? Similarly, the shamanic rites are also very important because it brings in the whole element of social setting. It brings in the whole element of behavior and psychodrama. It brings in the whole element of placebo. And placebo is very important because normally we talk about placebo only in the clinical trial context. But in fact, it is everywhere. It is the power of belief. Just as we project omnipotence on somebody, we can take a step further that we project omnipotence and then we believe in what he says with the same kind of omnipotence, and that in turn might be creating the placebo effect. So the placebo effect in psychoanalysis is also something that we have not really gone into the depth of, particularly placebo effect using psychodrama type of situation. So this is another aspect, and this is also equally true in the spiritual Indian context, where the whole idea of being with the guru and the whole idea of idol worship, yagna, mantra, tantra, all of that is there. And those aspects are completely out of psychoanalysis as yet.
Is holistic healing rolling some constants into change?
Yes, because certain elements of holistic healing, take for example three, say homeopathy, take Reiki and pranic healing. In all the three, we see that without interpretation, without therapy, and without any allopathic medication, we are inducing change in the person in a psychological sense. And the change is happening not in years, but immediately in a few weeks or few months. So there is no question of the change not happening, and it challenges our idea of how change can be brought about in the psyche of the person. Because till now, we had a constant either allopathic medication or therapy, nothing else. So pharmacology or therapy. Now we bring in other elements that it is possible to bring about a change in the psyche of the person using very different methods, which neither involve medication of allopathy nor involve psychotherapy and the frame. And this is very explicitly observable. There is nothing difficult to observe in that sense. In case of psychosomatic sicknesses, we can even measure this by instruments. Say, for example, somebody is suffering from historical pain or psychologically driven asthma. You can see the effect of pranic healing by putting on oxygen saturation device, and you can see the level of oxygen before the pranic healing and after the pranic healing right there. Similarly, for homeopathy, you can take the medication and see before and after. Now, the whole point is if these things are able to influence the psyche, obviously it will have, if you accept this part, it has radical implications for the whole of psychoanalysis and psychology, also medicine and biology, that the model of the mind, pathogenesis, and the healing techniques, all areas will undergo a change. And this brings about another element. Right? Another constant was never to go out of psychoanalysis for healing. And now the question comes, should we combine these holistic healing techniques with psychoanalysis? And if we do so, is the combination a better result producer than two given individually alone? So this is one more constant that has to undergo a change. And ironically, uh, patients have changed even before therapists could contemplate of change. So even while the therapists are Puritan, patients are eclectic and they are doing both of these together. At times with the knowledge of the therapist, at times without his knowledge. So what we call integrated healing is already on at the level of patients, even if the healers don't recognize it.
But I believe for pharmacology or for psychoanalysis to accept all this with a huge amount of empirical evidence is possibly required by them.
There are two aspects why it is not easy to accept. There are three aspects actually, four actually. Uh, the first is non-allopathic systems of healing have not been good in empirical data collection and proving. So they need to hone up their skills and develop some patience and liking for the empirical method. That is one. The second element is the fundamentals and the whole paradigm of modernity is challenged by these holistic healing techniques. See, the challenge is paradigmatic. The challenge is not of operational level or tactical level. It's a paradigm challenge.
Very true. Yes.
For example, let us say 350 years back, when Newtonian science was at the peak, right, and people believe that anything that exists has weight and occupies space. At that time, if you had said that electricity can exist, which does not occupy space and does not have weight, you would be put in an asylum. But today, the power sector of the economy is one of the largest sectors of the economy, and they are buying and selling power which does not occupy space and has no weight. If you see an electric power line with current or without current, the space and the weight still are the same. So we are producing power, selling power. There is a power exchange like a stock exchange. Right? And what we are selling is something abstract. It is not occupying space, not having weight. So today, what is an everyday phenomena, what is a tradable commodity in the market, if you had said 500 years back that such a thing can exist, you would be in the asylum. So this is a complete paradigmatic change. And this is the kind of change that we are looking at, that the entire paradigm of modernity, allopathy and psychoanalysis would undergo a change. The entire materialistic paradigm would undergo a change if we were to explain and accept the healing potential of these alternative systems. Take for example homeopathy. The day we come to know how it works, it will completely revolutionize the way our body works. Our understanding of physiology, our understanding of pathogenesis and healing will completely undergo a change. Because something which does not involve substance, which can change the physiology, it's a completely different paradigm from what we are used to. So the second element is of paradigmatic change. The third element is of ideology. That people have identified themselves so closely with an ideology that if something changes in the area of science, they are unsettled and they don't allow science to progress. The fourth is people at the top. So in science, in physics particularly, it is said, science makes progress funeral by funeral. So unless the present uh, top authority figures go into the grave, it is not easy for the next paradigm to come up. And fifth is commercial and political interests. Because many of these discoveries are such that they are not easy to commercialize. They are empowering to individuals and not in the interest of corporates. So there is this corporate interest in keeping all these pathies out of the mainstream. So these are some of the reasons why it is so difficult to bring in these elements into allopathy or psychoanalysis and make some of the constants undergo a change, because with those constants are linked commercial interests, corporate interests.
And their biggest weapon is, I think, empirical data.
Yes, this is a very skewed contest, because you have a paradigm of allopathy and you have a paradigm of holistic healing. Now you are asking the paradigm of holistic healing to prove itself in the playground of allopathy.
Yes, yes,
Now,
exactly.
if two parties are in contest, how can you ask one to play and prove itself in the playground of the other when the other
Very
itself is
true.
an interested party?
Very true.
So
Yes.
the proving and non-proving has to happen in a neutral playground, which is the playground of neither. And this is a skewed evaluation of paradigms. And this is not brought out in public discourse because of the corporate interests.
Thank you again for this wonderful understanding. Uh, so now, from holistic healing, we come to spirituality. Do you see some aspects of spirituality relating to the subject we are discussing?
Yes, very much so, because one of the constants of psychoanalysis always was that we are amoral and non-prescriptive, whereas spirituality is clearly moral, goal-oriented and prescriptive. And this is now coming out in psychoanalysis, that enhancement of the superego function without being moralistic is one element, one of the constants which in mind of some should undergo a change, and there is a very big group which says it should be as it is. Second is this whole element of what spirituality rightly finds, the whole strength and necessity of the superego, the whole area of superego pleasure, the superego mania, superego pleasure, superego strength, which we have not explored. We have explored only the punitive aspects of superego. So we talk about superego pathology. We don't talk about the superego power for health or superego power for quality of life. And it's a very important element, very important constant to undergo a change. The third is the tools of spirituality. Tools of idol worship, in which, deeply speaking, psychoanalysis is deeply involved, although not analyzed as such. How to create an idol, how to worship an idol, how to relate with an idol, how to let go of an idol, how to mourn that idol. It's a very deep psychoanalysis in a form of an autotherapy, which is done under supervision of a guru. And it's almost like the guru is like a quarter therapist, not a full therapist. So, spirituality has a basket full of tools. Spirituality has a basket full of tools, uh, which we are yet to incorporate in psychoanalysis. We are yet to assimilate the superego, positive part of the superego functioning, and the assertion of spirituality that spiritual part of the mind, spirituality also is an intrinsic part of us, and for overall healing and quality of life, we have to factor in the spiritual aspect of life.
Come to our last question. How do you see present constants evolving in future?
My idea is that the first constant to undergo a change will be the model of the mind, the fundamental bedrock of all schools. Okay? Some schools have a model of the mind, some schools don't have, are more process oriented. But model of the mind is the first thing that will undergo a change in psychoanalysis. Second will be this whole idea of following only one school. Third will be uh, the incorporation of holistic healing tools. The fourth will be this whole movement away from only pathology to the positive aspects of life. And fifth will be the hallucinogens, transpersonal and parapsychology uh, engagement and synthesis in many areas of psychoanalysis. I believe this will be the core constants which will undergo a change, and that will have an impact across psychoanalysis in all the schools at all levels, from philosophy to model of the mind to operational concepts to pathogenesis to healing.
Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for this very, very enriching discourse. Uh, for any questions or feedback, do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.